Authentication can get really complex really quickly. You have to know the best practices as well as the security principles. On top of this, you also need to know how to manage chart tokens, what they are, user sessions, user management, two-factor authentication, OAuth, and a lot more, because this is just the tip of the iceberg. I have implemented authentication from the ground up, and trust me, it's a lot of work and also it's really complex. So in this specific video, I want to walk you through two popular libraries. One is Clerk that does it all for you, and second is Lucia that abstracts away the complexity of managing user sessions. So we will be deep diving into authentication in this specific video, and we will be adding auth from the ground up, that is Clerk as well as LuciaAuth, in two different apps, and I will be walking you through the trade-offs we have to make as we build these apps further. So let's get. I went on Twitter and asked folks who are the top players in auth, and as far as I knew, they were NextAuth, Superbase Auth, Clerk, and so on. And I wanted to ask others what are some authentication libraries that they like. So obviously we have Clerk, we have Remix Auth, then we have Lucia Auth, we have Apperance, NextAuth, AuthKit, and there are other, again, Lucia again. Plus, this option for Lucia got the most votes as well. So that's why in this specific video, we are going to use LuciaAuth and implement auth from the ground up. So first, let's take a look at this diagram and look at the challenges we have to go through when we have to roll out our own auth, or even why did we go for Clerk and LuciaAuth, for example, in this video. So when you have to roll out your own auth, then there are quite a few challenges. One, it's complex. You have to know the security principles as well as the best practices. You need to know the different types of tokens, the expiry of them, user sessions, cookies, and there's a lot more. So there are quite a few challenges when it comes to rolling out your own auth. So you need to know what you're doing to essentially do this. In this specific video, we are going to use LuciaAuth and implement auth from the ground up. But why LuciaAuth? What is so special about it? Well, if you take a look at all the different ways you can implement auth, we have Remix Auth, Superbase Auth, NextAuth, and so on. On the other hand, we have Auth0, Firebase, and Clerk. If you're okay to lose control when it comes to implementing authentication, then definitely go for Auth0, Firebase, Clerk, and so on. They will manage it all for you. You will have way less control over what you can do, but you will get a nice hosted auth. And all you need to do is write a few lines of code that I will show you, and then that's it. That's the benefit you get. But obviously there are trade-offs wherein you have less control. On the other hand, we have Remix Auth, Superbase Auth, NextAuth, and so on. Here, again, when it comes to implementing auth and adding, let's say, sign in with Google or sign in with GitHub and so on, it's definitely a lot easier than rolling out your own. But still, it's definitely opinionated because they have their way of implementing authentication that you sort of have to go with. So for example, in case of NextAuth, if you have to roll out your own username and password, then it is a lot more complex and it's not that simple compared to, for example, using something like Clerk, where all you need to do is just tell Clerk, this is what I'm looking for, configure it, and add it in your code. And we will walk you through that as well. But in the middle, we have LuciaAuth. So let's take a look at what's so special about Lucia. Lucia definitely gives you a lot more control. So this way, you have to configure and you have to write a bit more code in terms of how you want to implement your auth, but it still abstracts away the complexity of authentication. So if we were to head over to the documentation, it will work alongside your database, and then it will provide an API that's very easy to use and understand. Plus, it works in any of these runtimes as well. It's fully typed, and plus you don't have to deal with a lot, but you do have to configure a lot and know exactly what you're doing as well over here. But LuciaAuth is definitely a lot simpler to get started, and if you want a solution where you do want some control, but you also want the complexity to be handled, that auth provides you. So Lucia is definitely a good option where you don't want to roll out your own auth and deal with the complexity there. But with Lucia, it will make it easier for you as it will provide the APIs so that you can implement your own auth and configure it. So you manage your own users, you have full control of that as you need to configure your database as well. And they give you some options and tutorials and so on to manage sessions and implement OAuth or username and password and so on. So that's where Lucia Auth sits. It sits between the fully managed auth versus somewhat managed to in the middle where you don't have to roll out everything on your own, but you can roll out something with Lucia Auth. So that's where Lucia Auth is. We will be setting up Clerk and then we will be using Lucia Auth to essentially implement authentication from the ground up. Let me give you a quick walkthrough of the that we are building with Clerk. Now this is essentially a Clerk hosted modal, and we haven't necessarily built this modal at all for sign up. Now by default on the homepage, you would see a nav bar with auth explained as the name of the app and also the hosted sign up modal. If you already have an account, you can click on sign in and then sign in to Clerk as well. Sign in to your authentication layer as well. Similarly, if you click on sign in from the navbar, you should also be taken there. Now, let's go ahead and create an account because right now we don't have one. So, for example, we can just create an account with my email address and then I'm just gonna use this to suggest the password. Then let's hit continue. The minute we do that, I now need to verify using the code that it has sent me because only the email option is available. Now the code is 892261. So now it has verified the code and you can see that I have been redirected to the home page with hello, my specific email address. And because the sign in was successful. Now in the nav bar, the sign in button has changed to this specific option, but you can also go ahead and manage your account or sign out. Again, this is also built by Clerk. This is something that we have just integrated. So if you click on manage account, you can go ahead and update your profile photo or change your password if you like, or even delete an account. So you have full control, and all of this is built with Clerk. You can add several email addresses or even remove the specific email too. I've uploaded my profile photo, and now if I close this option, you can see my profile photo along with my email address is showing up on the nav bar, which is really nice. And all of this is built using the Clerk components that we will take a look at in this specific video. Now, we can also go ahead and click sign out. This way, we are basically signed out. But now if you go to the dashboard on Clerk, we should see our user that we just signed in with, which is my email address. And as you click on that specific user, you have a lot more options to basically manage that specific user. You could impersonate that user, change your password, ban user, delete user, and so on. Plus, you can see all their information as well. You can also update their user permissions as well. All of this can be done in Clerk because Clerk will manage all the users and you have basically some configuration options to update their profile and whatnot. This is the app that we are going to build using Clerk, and you will learn the power of using something like Clerk. Now we have only enabled email address and password, but in this specific video, I will also show you how to enable Google login, get any sort of OAuth as well. So you can do all of that using Clerk with just a few steps. So that's the app we are building. So first, let's go ahead and implement Clerk. Now, Clerk is obviously more than just a sign-in box. We can use admin dashboards to authenticate and manage users and so on. Now, let's go ahead and sign up. Now, since I have already signed up, I see this dashboard option, but you should see a sign up option. So make sure you go ahead and do that. I'm just going to head over to the dashboard. Now, we already have an app here, Auth, but let's create a new app and we can enable whatever we want in this specific application. So let's just call this explained. Now we can enable whatever we want here. So you can see all the different options. We have sign in with Google, Facebook, Apple, GitHub, Microsoft, LinkedIn, Dropbox, and so on. Now, obviously, when you select more of these options, then you have to then upgrade to a pro account. But really, we don't want any of this. We're just going to focus on username and password in this specific video. So let's just go ahead and only select email, for example, and let's go ahead and click on create application. The minute we do that, it is now giving us options for all the different frameworks we can integrate this with. Now, first, let's just go ahead to the Next.js documentation because we will be using Next.js as a framework of choice. So let's go ahead and install Next.js. Now let's go ahead and copy this and head over to the terminal. Now let's just paste it. Now here, let's just call this app auth explained clerk. We're just going to go with all the default options, and we will be using Tailwind CSS alongside DaisyUI to basically set up the look and feel of our app. But for now, let's just go ahead and select all of these options. Make sure you say yes to would you like to use router option, and then hit enter. It's going to install the dependencies as well as the dev dependencies needed to bootstrap our app. Next, we also need the clerk package in order for us to get clerk in our app. So now let's go back. And before we do this, let's go and cd in auth explain clerk. I just paste this. And we also need to paste this in our n.local file because we need the publishable key and the secret key for clerk. So now let's just open it up in Visual Studio Code, for example. And now let's create a new file called as .n.local. Here, let's just paste what we copied. And that's a setup for the API keys and storing that in the environment variables. Before we go ahead and do anything, let's make sure that our application runs as expected. So let's just run npm run dev, which starts our development server. And let's head over to localhost 3000. And there you go. We have our Next.js app. And alongside that, we also have Clerk installed as well in our application. So now as next steps, let's just go ahead and follow what they show us here. So now we're just going to copy this, which is adding Clerk provider to your app. So we are going to head to layout, and layout is a spot that wraps our entire application. So we definitely need this. So here, let's just wrap. Let's just create Clerk provider and wrap it in layout. Wrap our entire app with Clerk provider. We have imported Clerk provider from Clerk Next.js. Similarly, we also need this middleware file, which basically enables the authentication and it separates the protected routes from the non-protected routes and so on. And what this middleware also does is that it is going to be the middle person when we basically execute the page. So for example, anytime we call a specific route inside of Next.js, then this specific file will be called. And if we say that, hey, just route the user or log the user out if they don't have permissions to something, we could do all of that in this specific file. So again, let's just go to our home and create a file called as middleware.ts and paste it. There you go. That's all we need to add clerk authentication. We have made quite a few changes, so let's just go ahead and restart our app. So now if I refresh the page, we have the provider and we have the environment variables and all of that, but we have not necessarily implemented the sign in and sign out pages or even the sign up pages for our app as well. So our app works as expected, and as we wrap the provider with layout and all of that. But now we need to also add a sign in and sign out pages. So for example, over here, we have this modal from Clerk with email address and password. And then when we hit sign in, then we get the sign in option too. So we have the sign up option as well as the sign in option. When you go to sign in or sign up, for example, right from here, or just go to sign in here or sign up here and so on. So we need to implement this. And in order for us to get this, we definitely need to implement sign in and sign out. And the way you do that in Clerk is by going in the app directory. What we essentially need is we need two pages. One is a sign in page. So for example, you can see I'm redirected to /sign in. And the minute I click on sign up, then I am going to the route sign-up. So that's what we need. And at the same time, if I go to the home page, then nothing really happens. I get redirected back to the sign up page because I don't have a user yet. But similarly, if I had hit sign in and let's say enter my email address, continue, and then I forgot my password, you can see that I can now enter whatever code I want as well over here. So now, if I go ahead and hit sign in, then I can just pretty much select my option for my email address, and then it populates my password as well because I have already signed in before. And now it tells me that hello, and my email address that I used to sign in has been displayed here. But at the same time, this specific option has turned into a way that I as a user can manage my account. So if I hit manage account and go to security, I could update my password, I could change my user profile and add whatever image I want as well over here, for example. So I could do whatever I want here, and this has updated my image here too. So this is how I could manage all of this in Clerk. So we want to implement something similar inside of app as well right here. Now let's go ahead and add DaisyUI, which is a very popular component library for Tailwind CSS. This way our form looks really beautiful by just using DaisyUI. So the way you use this library is by first installing it and requiring it in the Tailwind config file, which is the global configuration file for Tailwind CSS. Now, again, they have options for Next.js, they have different repositories as well, but it's pretty straightforward. So what we're going to do is we're just going to copy this and install it. But before we implement and add DaisyUI inside our app, let me show you how it works. The way you add DaisyUI is by basically going to any of the components that you want, which it has a lot of different components, and just let's say if you want to add a button, then all you need to do is go to the button, and however you want your button to look, you can just go ahead and copy the HTML or JSX code, in our case, to basically copy paste it exactly as we want. Now, what DaisyUI does is that it uses specific class names such as BTN neutral, primary, secondary, accent, info, success, warning, error, and so on. So it also is able to switch us to a different theme, and we are able to modify these colors to whatever we want so our application looks consistent as well. But let's say if we want drop down, then all we need to do is add some class names and we get drop down as well. And it has a bunch of different components. In our case, we'll mainly be using whatever is needed for the form. But what we also need is some sort of a theme for our application. So we could head over to a theme generator and then generate whatever theme we want. Or on top, we could just go to DaisyUI themes and select from a bunch of pre-existing themes. So for example, we could go with retro, Valentine, dark, cupcake, and so on, which is pretty nice because you get a really default, beautiful looking theme. So your application starts to look good already. So that's what we'll be using in this specific tutorial. So for example, let's just go ahead and copy this again in case we didn't, to install DaisyUI in our app. So let's stop the server and paste what we just copied. Again, let's restart our server again. And now let's head over to our code and go to Tailwind config file. And in plugins, what we need is we need to go ahead and add require DaisyUI. So here we're going to say require DaisyUI. Similarly, in order for us to add the themes, we're going to say add an object for DaisyUI with themes. Now let's go to our app and again do the same here. Now this would apply the theme cupcake, for example. But now if we go here and refresh the page, you can see there were some changes, but not really, because we still have our app exactly. We still have this specific page as well. So let's just get rid of everything inside of main here. And now let's just wrap this up with a simple main tag. And now let's just go ahead and add some basic styling to our app. So for example, here, let's just go ahead and add a button, for example. Now let's say we want a primary button, so we're gonna copy that. And now let's just paste what we copied. We can get rid of this as well. This would add the class name button with button primary so that the specific colors for that specific theme gets automatically chosen. So now if we head over to our app, you can see the primary button does look like the theme that we have applied, but we also have these weird colors. So let's just go to global.css right here inside of app and pretty much get rid of all of this because we don't need it. Similarly, we can get rid of this as well. This is just the pre-existing styling that came from our Next.js app, but we don't need it. And now look at that. Now we have some colors applied as per the theme that we have applied in Tailwind. One really cool thing about Clerk is that it already gives us these bunch of components that we could just use in our application. So for example, sign in, sign in button, sign up button, and so on. So we can just use these and we don't have to create anything on our own. But they also give us some customization so that we could make the UI look according to our brand. So that's exactly what we'll do now. So for example, in our app, what we can do is let's go ahead and add this sign in button, for example. So to essentially go to layout for this. So if you go to layout, here we have the clerk provider, but let's also go ahead and add a header right inside body. Right inside body. So for example, let's say you're gonna say header and then we're just gonna paste this code right here. Now, as you can see that I have not necessarily filled or imported any of these buttons here. So if I click on sign in, then user button, then again, sign in is already imported. All of these are actually coming from the Clerk Next.js package itself. Same thing we want to do for sign out button and sign in buttons and so on. So what we're going to say is, hey, this is the auth explain repo. And right now it is a tag. Let's use a next link component, which basically points to home. And then over here, we are saying if it's signed in, then show the user button. But if it's signed out, then show the sign in button, for example. So now if we head back to our app, now you can see this signed in option, which takes us to the signed in hosted Clerk UI, for example. But keep this in mind, this is not necessarily in our local host, it's actually hosted somewhere else. So in order for us to implement the sign in button, let's go ahead and add the sign in page in our application. Now, let's go ahead and add a route called as slash sign in. Similarly, let's also go ahead and add a route called as slash sign up. And the way we would do that in Clerk is by creating a catch-all route. That's what it requires us. So what we could do is we could say sign in. And this would mean that any type of sign in route is going to get routed. Here, I'm just going to say page.tsx. Now, above this, we also need a folder. So let's just move this folder out. And then this sign in would be right here. So this is how you need to define the catch-all route for sign in. And catch-all route would mean that anytime user enters anything inside of sign in is basically going to go here. Here we're just gonna say export default function page. And this is just gonna be the Next.js page. But here what we would want is our sign in page. So again, we're gonna use the sign in component clerk. So first we're just gonna wrap it up with a class Tailwind classes. We're gonna center the div as well so that it's centered on the page, and we're just gonna give it a gap of 12. Now, let's go ahead and add the sign in functionality here. So now what we're going to do is we're just going to add sign in from clerk. So that's what we need. We need sign in functionality. And then here we're just going to say the path is going to be slash sign in. This way it knows that that's where it needs to host the login for clerk. So now let's go ahead and see what happens. So now when we head over to slash sign in, nothing happens because we haven't defined sign in properly. We just need a hyphen right here. Now if we go back and refresh the page, look at that. Now we have our signed in hosted UI ready to go from clerk. So for example, here I could basically just log in and continue. Now it could not find my account, so I will just go to sign up, for example. But again, if you notice, sign up is taking me to the Clerk development mode. This is a developer environment that Clerk provides, so we can see what our hosted login and sign up look like. But we need to create a sign up page similar to sign in so that when you click on sign up, it goes there compared to the other URL that we were looking at. But here we can basically sign in and essentially go ahead and do that. But now before we can implement and check it out, let's implement sign up. So now, similar to how we implemented sign in, let's also implement a sign out route. So if we go back, we could just pretty much copy this, or let's just create a new folder. Doesn't matter. Just say sign up. And now inside of that, we need to create another folder, catch all route. So all the sign up parameters get caught here. And let's create a new page.tsx, which is the default page here. We can copy this and paste sign up here. But instead of sign in, it's going to be sign up. Now let's paste what we copied, and sign in, this is going to be sign up. That's all you need. So now when I click on sign up and everything is working as expected, then we should be redirected to sign up. The minute I do that, nothing really happens. But if I go to sign up, let's make sure everything works. Sign up does work as expected. When I click on sign in, it still takes me to this completely different route and not within the application. And the way we can fix that, because it right now takes us directly back to a different URL altogether, is by defining environment variables right here. So here we can just say next public, and here we're going to define the sign in and sign out route, so Clerk knows that's where it needs to redirect. So it's pretty straightforward. We're just going to say Clerk sign in URL. Similarly, we're going to say here Clerk sign up URL. And here we're going to say it's going to be sign in. And over here, we're going to say it's going to be sign up. The minute we make changes in the environment file, we need to restart the server. So let's go ahead and restart the server. Now, once we refresh the page, when I click on sign in, it does take us to our app. Similarly, when you click on sign up, it does take us here. Now let's go ahead and create an actual account here. So here I'm just going to use the email address and password I had and hit continue. And the verification code is 441050. Now, as I verified it, you can see that my username is shown over here and it has a Clerk hosted menu bar here, which is pretty awesome because now it knows my username. So as a user, I could go and manage my account. I could update my profile. I could just go to my profile pic and update it. I could change my password if I want as well. And I don't need to build any of this as a developer. I just need to use pretty much a few UI components to integrate Clerk. So now the way we are enabling that is by, again, using when it's signed in, it shows the user button. And this property show name shows the name as well. So if I don't want that, then I could just not have it. But for now, let's keep it. Similarly, if I were to go ahead and click on sign out, I'm back to the home page and it shows me the sign in button, which is what I want. Now, by default, we'll probably want the sign in modal over here as well, just in case the user is not logged in, for example. So what we can do for that is go to the page file. And in this case, we could pretty much get rid of this button. And here we're just going to check if the user exists or not. Clerk comes with a lot of different hooks that are really handy while building our authentication layer further. So for example, we have so many hooks available in the documentation. For example, we have the use user hook, which basically allows us to access the current user data whenever you need it. So let's say you want to show current user information, for example, from the user object, then you can as well. For example, if you want to get the first name, last name, and so on. Similarly, it has the use sign in hook, for example, which allows you to check the current state of sign in. Similarly, it has so many different hooks that we could utilize to get specific information about application, about the authentication that we have set up with Clerk. So that's exactly what we're going to do in our case as well. So in our explained app, or the app that we're trying to replicate, for example, over here, by default, we show a sign up page, for example. But let's say we have signed in and we hit continue. Then we show a hello user and a photo next to the email address, for example, in the nav bar. We have this implemented, but we need something like this as well. So that's what we will implement here. So for example, we're going to use one of the hooks that is available to us. So for example, we can say user is going to be current user, which is the hook from Clerk. And then let's make this function async because we are calling it an await over here. Now inside here, we can check that, hey, if there is no user, then we want to return the sign up functionality that we had. So for example, if we take a look here, we want to just copy this and paste it here and import sign up. We don't even need to say path equals sign up. We can just sign up. But let's say we do have a user, then we want to share something else too. So again, here, let's just give it flex call, padding top 12, which is going to be 3 rem, item center, justify center as well, and a gap of 12. Now let's give it a p tag, and here is where we're going to say, hey, welcome back. So let's add a emoji with a wave and emoji over here, and then just say hello. We can access users safely here because we're already checking if it doesn't exist here. So here we can say user dot user username, or in our case email address, for example, of 0 dot email address. Now since it's typed, we can already check this is the user object from current user, which returns a user value, and these are all the different properties here. And email addresses is in fact an array of email addresses, which returns a property called as email address. So we could just go into the types and check exactly what we should access. Now we've got this information now. We have the list of email addresses, and then if there's no user, we just want to return the sign up. Now let's go back to our app. Now you can see that we already have a hosted sign up page here. And let's say we were to sign in, for example, and hit continue. You should see hello, my email address that I used to sign in, which is very similar to the app. Now, in order for us to make the app look exactly how we want it to, instead of calling it cupcake, we could call this retro. Now look at that. It has started to look very similar to this specific app, which is what we want. You can obviously give it a class name here. So you can say text2xl, or let's say text3xl. Now you can see that our app is this, or even this. Both of them are looking pretty good, the app that we're trying to build. So now we have this. Let's say we were to log out here. Now you can see that the hosted sign up modal is on the left hand side. The clerk gives us another property, and it's called appearance. This allows us to customize the appearance of these specific hosted modals that we get. And here we have elements, which has specific properties that we can use. So for example, we can say root box is going to be MX auto, and then we're going to give it padding. Similarly, we can change the primary button color to be whatever we want. So we're going to say background color. And here is where we can pass in whatever hex code that we want as well, or whatever styling we want. We can easily add it here because of this appearance prop object. Now when we go back, you can see already that it's actually in the center, with the button color has changed to purple, for example. Now our clerk little modal is looking really nice. We have the branding necessary as intended, but now notice that there is a specific error as well that we should definitely resolve. It says that the signup component is not configured correctly, and it's because the root route is not a catch-all route. So whenever we have to use sign up or sign in, we need to use a catch-all route as Clerk requires us to. So in order for us to fix that, we need to do something similar as we did for sign up and sign in. So here, let's just add rest and then move the root page to here. So it will act as the same as before, because the rest is a catch-all route and we haven't defined a root route here. This means page is going to directly be the default page for any of the queries in the URL. So now if we go back here, you will notice that the error is gone. So now everything works as expected. But notice one more thing. This is a purple button, whereas everything else isn't. So let's go ahead and just copy the appearance that we have in the rest of the pages as well, because we haven't done that really. So here as well. So now when we go back, you can see that the primary button is purple. Same thing for this one. Same thing for everything else too, which is exactly what we are looking for. So that's the beauty of Clerk. Like, we were able to set up a authentication layer and a base auth in just a few seconds because it makes it that easy for us to set up our entire auth layer. Now, obviously, auth is a lot more complex than this. For example, we want to access specific values about the user and things like that. And for that reason, we have all these different helpers or these hooks that we could use alongside the Clerk auth layer so we can use these hooks that Clerk provides us, which are sort of like helper methods for users that are signing in and signing up. So we can access any of the values that we're looking for our users, for example, which is pretty neat. So now when it comes to using Clerk, there are definitely some trade-offs as well. For example, we can go to the dashboard to manage all of our users that have logged in, but this means that we need to use this dashboard and Clerk is going to manage the sign in, sign out, the sessions, or whatever we have configured so far on their own. So we have less control in terms of how auth works. We also have limitations in terms of the branding as well. Yes, we can configure the appearance the way we want it to, but we need to be okay with whatever we get outside of Clerk in terms of the look and feel of our application. The other trade that we have to make is that because we are not managing the sessions or the tokens or any of that stuff, and Clerk is doing all of that for us, it's also going to manage the users too. This means we will not necessarily have full control over our users versus Clerk is going to do that. That means you're going to pay for the number of users that your application has. So this makes a lot more sense. Clerk makes a lot more sense for enterprise applications because the more users you have, the more expensive it's going to get. And that's how the model works as well. One more disadvantage is that if Clerk faces any disruption in their service, this means the authentication is not going to work and users won't be able to log in or sign up in your application. So you're pretty much relying on Clerk to make sure that they're always up and running. Otherwise, none of your logins or sign up are going to work. So that is definitely a risk that you need to consider when it comes to using Clerk. But overall, if you're really happy with someone else managing your auth, and because it can get really complex, as I mentioned earlier, then Clerk is definitely a really good solution. And a lot of companies are in fact using Clerk these days. It's a really good option for you if you're okay with any of these trade-offs. So when it comes to auth, there are essentially two different ways of storing user information and authenticating a user. One of them is session and the other one is tokens. Tokens would mean JSON Web Tokens, or also known as JOT or the JWT. They allow you to verify and generate tokens, and that is something that the client and the browser use. And there's a secret key involved so that the server knows how to decode the token and get the necessary information as well. So for example, this is how the token looks like. It has a header, payload, and a signature, which only the server would know to basically decode the specific token. Now the client is essentially going to store the specific token onto the browser, and that's how JOT tokens work in summary. But on the other hand, authentication also has sessions, and essentially sessions would mean that again the server would create the session once the user logs in and gives back a session ID, which the client would essentially use to store and authenticate the specific user. Now, again, these are two different ways of authenticating users. And when it comes to Lucia Auth, it uses sessions to essentially authenticate the user. And with this auth library, all we need to do is make sure that we get the user's information, and it's going to abstract away the complexity of handling sessions. All we need to do is create the session, provided we give it the user ID, and then validate the session, giving it the session ID. And this way, we are able to authenticate the users. And that's exactly what we're going to do with Lucia. So let me give you a quick walkthrough of the Lucia Demo app that we are going to build. So this is the homepage. App will be called Auth Explain. Let's zoom in a little bit. Now over here, because we are not logged in, it says, hello, you need to log in with a login button. As you can see, this app has a theme thanks to DaisyUI for all the components. We will be learning, you will be learning all of that too in this specific video. Then we also have a really nice nav bar. When you click on sign up, it takes you to the sign up page where you can create an account, or you can go back to the login page where you can log in. So now let's just go ahead and sign up. So now what we are going to do is we are going to create a account called as Kobe Bean. And then I'm just gonna ask my browser to suggest a strong password. Then let's click on sign up. The minute we do that, we get redirected to login because we have been successfully signed up. Now, ideally, it would have been nice to have some sort of a pop-up message that, hey, you have signed up, but that's optional because we are going to focus on learning LuciaAuth and Clerk and all the different authentication principles in this specific video. So now that we have signed up, we are also going to use MongoDB to store all our users and also sessions. So if we head over to, let's say, Browse Collections, you can see now we have the auth database with the sessions table and also, or I should say, a sessions collection and a users collection. Now, when you click on users, you can see now that there is a user called as Kobe Bean right here with a password hash and an ID created. Similarly, if we head over to sessions, then we should also have a session. Then we should also have a session for that specific user. So for example, if we take a look at this specific ID, the session is also going to be the session with an ID of that. So that means we have successfully signed up. Now let's go ahead and log in using Kobe Bean, for example, and let's hit sign in. The minute we do that, look at that. We get redirected to the home page, and now hello Kobe Bean with a sign out button has showed up here. This means that we are also able to retrieve information from user profiles, and we can show that onto the home page as well. Now, if I hit sign out, then we are automatically signed out. And if I refresh the page, or let's say go to home page, for example, then it says you need to log in. So that's exactly what we will be building with LuciaAuth. So now let's go ahead and set up LuciaAuth. And for that, we are going to create a brand new project. Again, it's going to be a Next.js project as well. Here, we're just gonna paste what we copied, and then let's call this explained Lucia. Again, go with the default options and then install the dependencies and the dev dependencies. Now, if we go to the documentation for Lucia, let's just make sure we install the specific package called as Lucia, which is pretty straightforward right here. Whoops, not here, but in auth explain Lucia. Let's paste what we copied and install Lucia right here. Now, in addition to this, there's one more thing we are going to install for verifying passwords, but we will do that a bit. So now let's go ahead and start up our development server. If you go to localhost 3000, then Next.js with Lucia is ready to go. So now it's time for us to essentially get started and import Lucia in our project and create our app. Now let's take a look at this diagram that will describe what exactly we are going to do next. First, we are going to store all the information about the users and the Mongo database. Now keep this in mind, when we were using Clerk, we didn't need to do that because Clerk does it for us. But when it comes to Lucia, we're gonna have access to all our users and maintain the sessions and whatnot as well. So for this, we are going to use MongoDB to store information. So in our MongoDB database, we are going to have two things. One, we are going to have a session collection, and then we are going to have a user collection as well. Session collection will store any of the session IDs that we would create to authenticate the user, and user collection would store the username and password or any of the information that we need about the user. In this case, it's mainly going to be just username and password. Now, once we store the information inside of our database, here's what's going to happen. Once the user logs in, we are going to check if this specific user exists in user collection or not. If they exist, Then we are going to get the session ID right here. So I'm just going to say, yes, this user exists. No, this user does not exist. So if the user exists, then we are going to get the session ID and create a session cookie. But if the user does not exist, then we are just going to create a brand new session, store it in our session collection, and then create the session cookie. Now, again, all of this is really important for us to log in. On the other hand, let's say the user signs up, then we are just going to straight up go to creating a session, for example. In that case, we're just going to go directly to this specific option where we are going to essentially just create the session and then create the session cookie that will be used to authenticate the specific user. So that's exactly how Lucia Auth works. Lucia Auth already gives us the API needed to create the sessions and whatnot. But we definitely need to set up our Mongo database. So let's do that. So now let's go ahead and sign in, or in your case, sign up if you don't have a MongoDB account. So let's go ahead and sign in. And here I'm just going to enter my username and password and then log in because I already have an account. Now, the way MongoDB works is that you would need to essentially create a cluster as a start. In my case, I already have a cluster, so I'm going to show you the configuration I chose. You want to click on Shared and go for the free forever option to create a free pricing model for MongoDB, so you're not paying anything out of pocket. In this case, once you do connect and create the cluster, you can connect it, go to the drivers, install MongoDB, and get the connection string needed to connect to the specific cluster. But before we do that, I want to show you the database section. Now, when you see cluster, you can also click on Browse Collections, and this is where you would retrieve all the collections we need to set up. So for example, in this case, I already have a auth database. So we can just create database, and here you want to select auth, and the collection name you would want is users and then sessions after that. I already have both here. We have a users collection as well as the sessions collection. And that's exactly what I showed right here. We have the session collection and the user collection. That's exactly what we have set up in our MongoDB as well. So we will be storing the sessions here and all our users with username and password here. So this is the setup for MongoDB. So all we're going to do right now is head over to Overview, connect to the cluster, go to drivers, and then grab this string for getting the database URL string that we are going to set up in our application. So now let's me just open it up in Visual Studio Code, which is going to be the editor of my choice. And let's go ahead and restart the server as well. So right here, we have the app. And here we are going to create a new file called as .n.local. And this is where we are going to store the URL that we just copied. So for example, we're going to call this mongo underscore URI and then paste the URL that we just copied. This has all the information needed. This URI has all the information needed as possible. Now you want to make sure that you fill in the username and password here that you would retrieve after you get the cluster. In my case, I'm just gonna paste this information as well. Now, make sure you create your own and don't copy mine because I really don't want to bloat my database, but make sure you create one yourself because it's completely free of charge as well. We are going to now connect with our database, and for that, let's just head over to the Lucia docs and head over to the database section for MongoDB. Here we're going to install the MongoDB adapter for Lucia as well, because again, we need the adapter so that Lucia can know how to connect to MongoDB and store the sessions and users that we talked about as well. Again, let's restart the server. So now let's go ahead and test our database connection and set up Lucia in our project. We have some code here, so we're just going to pretty much copy this. Now, what we're going to do is let's create a new folder here called as lib. Here we're going to have two files, auth.ts file and db.ts file. Now, in the db.ts file, we're going to store all the database stuff. So for example, we're going to connect to the Mongo client and then connect to the DB, keep all the database stuff here. But then when it comes to using the Mongo adapter, let's move it outside. This file's job is to make sure that the database is connected and all the user collections are set up as expected as well. So instead of calling this, we should call this session doc here. So there was a bit of a typo there in their documentation. We have the user, let's call this collection, and session collection to make it a little bit more verbose. Similarly, let's just export it because we're going to need that in the other file too. Now we have the Mongo client, and here is where we would use our Mongo URI. So we're gonna say process.end.mongo_URI. We also need to make sure we have two more things. One is the username that the user is gonna enter, and the second one is the hash password. So we're gonna add that over here as well. So you're gonna say username is gonna have a string, and then hashed password is also going to be string. We're going to hash it later on, but for now, let's keep it as is. Session doc will have the ID, exp and the user ID so that we know which session was associated to which user. So for example, this user ID is going to be the exact user ID that we use in the user doc. Now this is complaining, so we can just move this inside a async block over here, just like that. Or I guess here, something like that. This way it's going to connect to the database and then give us the database that we need, and we're going to make sure that we need to export this as well. Now this is pretty much good to go. We have our database set up. We can get rid of these two items. Now in our auth file is where we would create the new instance of Lucia. So we have the database here. If we head over to the getting started section, we want to initialize Lucia by copying here. I'm going to paste this, and we don't need a SQLite adapter. We basically need our MongoDB adapter here. So if we head over to the database, let's see what we have for MongoDB. So we're going to get this specific adapter here and move that here. And this MongoDB adapter is going to come from the package that we recently installed. And the session is going to be the session collection from DB, and user is going to be the user collection as well. Now there's one more thing we need to do, which is that right now we haven't specified which DB we want to connect to, because in a cluster on MongoDB, there could be many databases. So here we're just going to call this, I want to connect to the Auth DB that we created, and then basically retrieve the collections from there. Right, so now we have this. And alrighty, so now we have the session cookie here. We initialize the Lucia adapter here, and we only want to make it secure when it's HTTPS, which is in production. We need one more function, which is called as get user attribute, so we could retrieve the username as well. Gonna have this return, and username is going to be attributes dot. So this is the app that we are building, Auth Explained for Lucia now. We need a header, login and sign up. At the same time, we need a login, and when you click on sign up, we need to create this as well. So how about we go ahead and install DaisyUI inside of this application as well, so that we can design it and make it look like this one. So again, let's go to the installation section, copy this, and install DaisyUI. Now the theme that we are going to use for this one is going to be Cupcake. So let's just copy this right here. Head over to Tailwind config file and then paste what we copied, and this is just going to be Cupcake as a theme. We have our base localhost 3000 here, which is fine. So let's go ahead and create a new folder called Signup. And this folder will have a page called Signup. Now, I'm just gonna say default function page. That's it. So now we're gonna just have a div here. And this div is pretty much going to be flex column. It's gonna be centered, right? We want everything to be centered onto the page. And then let's give it a gap of 12. Now let's also give it a header here, and just to make sure that our theme looks as intended. Again, let's disable the inline fold for this specific workspace so we can see our styling. So we're gonna say create an account. Perfect. So now if I head over to localhost/signup, we see a create an account. Now let's just go to global CSS and get rid of the styling that we don't need, essentially right here. Now you can see create a sign up, create an account right here. Now if we go here, let's just go ahead and create a basic form. Now let's see if DaisyUI has something like that. So if we go here and search for input, let's see what form they have for us. So we have a form which is something like this. So we can just copy this. Now all we need is username and password. So I'm just gonna copy the last two elements. Perfect. So now let's wrap this up in a form and then paste what we just copied. Now if we go back to not this one but this one, you can see that now we have a form as well as we have a password and a username. Now all we need is a button here, so let's just add that too. So you can say button and then sign up. Now let's make sure we copy the styling of the button. So we need primary button, which is going to be button as primary. So let's just copy this and paste it over here as well. So now if we head over to this, we have Lucia Auth as this. Similarly, we need to line it. So we can say flex call, gap is going to be 4. So we have the labels. Whoops, put the button inside a label when it should be outside. Perfect. So now there is some spacing here with the sign up, and ideally what we would want is a curved border, for example. So like, let's see if DaisyUI has something like that for input. So we need something like this with an icon inside. So let's just copy this and get rid of all of this. So we have not added DaisyUI as a plugin here. So we need to do that, otherwise none of the styling is gonna work. And now look at that, so much better because we did not add the styling here. So that's what we want to do for sure. So let's go ahead and also a padding top of 3 rem, so it has some padding on top here. And lastly, let's also give the form a border. So let's just wrap this up in a div, and then for this specific div, let's give it a border. So again, we can say flex item center, justify center, so in the center of the page, flex column, gap of 10, border 2, border dashed, and then give it some padding, make the borders rounded, give it pink of 300. Perfect. And now look at that, our form is looking so much better, and this is going to be the sign up form. So now what we want is the minute we enter the username and password in this form, and when you click on sign up, it should sign the user up. That means in our MongoDB database, here, we should see a user created with that specific username and password available for us. So that's what we're going to do now. Sign up form is looking pretty good. So it's time for us to connect that with server actions. So what we're going to do is all the server code that we are going to write, for example, to sign the user up, to connect to the MongoDB, and to check if the user exists or not, all of that can be done in a server action. There's no need for it to be on the client side. That's what we're going to do. So in order for us to do that on the form, we're going to add an attribute here called as action equals sign up action. And we're also going to create a new folder called as actions. Now here we're going to call this sign up action.ts. Make it a use server, so it is a server action file. And then here, let's just export it. Export async function, sign up action, and that's it. So now what we're going to do is the first parameter it's going to have access to is form data, which is going to be of the type form data. So let's just log form data, for example, right here. Now going back to sign up, let's just import signup action from signup action file that we just created. So if everything works as expected, let's make sure that there are specific IDs for username. So we're going to have username as ID and name username as well. Same thing for password. We're going to have, let's not add value to any password. So we're just going to have ID as password and name as password as well. So this way form data is able to retrieve the username and password from these inputs. Alrighty. So now if let's just enter Anki and some password here for now. We hit sign up. Let's clear this just to make sure. Hit sign up. Go to actions. Just say form data. So now let's go to Anki and add 1234. Hit sign up. And you can see that we have a form data with username Anki and password is 1234, which is exactly what I typed. So that's pretty nice that our server action is hooked up. So now let's go ahead and retrieve username and password from the server action as well. So here we're going to say username is going to be form data.get username. Password is also going to be something similar. And we definitely need to have some validation here for username as well as password. So if the type of username is not equal to string, then we're just gonna return it an error. For example, let's say error is gonna be invalid username. Similarly, if the password is not string, we're gonna say invalid password. But again, you can imagine that there are more validation messages, more validations here, such as username.length has to be more than 3 characters. Similarly, password 2 should be more than 3 characters. Obviously, now we also need to make sure that the password length also needs to be less than maybe it should be less than 6 characters as well, so it can only max 6 characters. But again, we can add a lot of validations for username and password. For now, we're not going to do any of that. We're just going to focusing on Lucia Auth. But you can imagine that you can add whatever validations that you want for username and password here, for example. So now at this point, our username and password is meeting the criteria. So now let's just hash the password to store it. We need to hash it. Then we're gonna insert the user in user collection because in our database, for example. Then once we do that, we can create the Lucia session and then set the cookie in the browser. Once everything is successful, let's redirect the user to log in to sign up. So after success. So this is what these are the steps we're gonna follow, right? We now have the username and password. We're gonna hash the password. We are going to insert the user in database. We're gonna create the Lucia session. We're gonna set the cookie and also redirect the user to login page because they have successfully signed up. So all of this makes sense. And once this is done, we can move to login. So in order for us to hash the password, I don't recommend you to implement any hashing algorithms from scratch, but instead use a package called as Argon, Node.rs Argon. Now, this essentially allows you to hash the password in the most secure way possible, and it's going to take away and handle the complexity of making sure that our password is successfully hashed as expected, for example. So now if we go to the Argon 2 package, for example, the Argon 2 was also the winner in the password hashing competition as well. So how about we just go ahead and install this. Let's npm install Argon 2. And now we have Argon 2. So let's just go ahead and hash the password. The function we're looking for hashing the password is going to be hash from Argon. So we can just say await hash, which comes from Argon 2. we are going to give it the password that we got, the string password. And here's what we are going to add as parameters. We're going to make the memory cost as 19485, time cost 2, output length 32, and then parallelism is 1. Now, we can go ahead and read all of those. For example, over here, memory cost is going to be the amount of memory used in the hash function. Time cost is going to be the amount of passes used by the hash function. It increases the hash strength. So we're going to say that we want it to be 2. And then output length is default is 32. So that's what we're going to do. We are adding the output length as 32. And then the last one is parallelism, which means that the amount of threads to compute the hash on. Again, it's going to create the most secure hash possible so that no one can decrypt the password. So now we don't even need to add both of these here because by default it is 32 and 1. But you get the idea. We want to make sure that we are creating a really good hash. Now we're gonna get the user ID here. Now we're gonna say generate ID from entropy size ID, and we're gonna give it the size of 10. We're gonna create a user ID, for example, which we are gonna use to store in database. The password is essentially going to be hashed right here. So now let's just make sure it's actually hashed as expected. If we head over to our application, hit sign up, go back here, you can see that it's unable to parse. It's unable to parse the specific character. And for that reason, in the next config file, we need to add a specific value. So we're going to make it experimental. We're going to add a server components tag, and we're going to add no rs argon 2 package here because for some reason Next.js is unable to handle the specific characters. So again, we're going to restart the server because we made some changes. Now if I click on sign up, you can see that we don't see the hash password. So let's just sign up. We see the form data, but we don't see the hashed password. So let's see hashed password. Let's just make sure that the password length is greater than 3, which we do have it, and username is more than 3. I hope it doesn't return an error. So let's just add a console log here. So this should be the opposite. That's a mistake we made. And same thing over here as well. Now let's go ahead and try it out. If you sign up, we should see the hash password as expected. And it has the Argon 2 ID and some other characters which we don't really need to care about. It is hashed successfully. All right, so now we have the hash password as well. Let's also add one more validation to our password, which is that the length is going to be greater than 255. That means it's invalid password. And here, let's just add invalid password, invalid user name. Perfect. So now we have some validations. We have hashed the password. So now let's just go and insert the user in the user collection in database. So now let's go ahead and insert the user in our user collection. So here we have the user ID created. What we're going to do is we're going to use the user collection that we created and insert one value, which is we only want to insert one specific value. User ID is going to be the Lucia ID. Username is going to be username, and then hash password is going to be password hash. Now these are all the values we want to add, and ID does not exist, but let's believe it's underscore ID, which does exist. If I go to user collection, it is underscore ID. Perfect. Okay, so now we're gonna insert the user. So if everything works as expected, before we even create any of this, it should insert the user. So now if I click on sign up, we get an error. Never. we get an error saying that it cannot read properties of undefined. So let's make sure everything works as expected. And we made a mistake. There is no Mongo URI. So let's just run the development environment again, refresh the page. Let's call this Anki with this as password and hit sign up. Minute we do that, looks like it worked. If it did, we should see a new user in the database. So let's see. We have an Anki user, but it's really hard to tell because we already have so many users here. So let's just go ahead and delete all of them. Okay, so now let's go ahead and try it out again. So if I click on sign up, and if we go to MongoDB, auth users, and look at that, a user has been successfully inserted, which is what we want. So now the next step in our server action, which is the sign up server action that we have, is to create a Lucia session. Now, in order for us to create the session, all we're going to do is again use Lucia to basically create the session that we want. So we have that. We're going to pass it the user ID, and the second parameter can be empty. So this session creates the session with the user ID that we get, that we have generated here, which we inserted here, and then we're using it to create the session in Lucia. Now we need to create a cookie so that we could store that inside the browser. So again, we're going to use Lucia to create a session cookie. And this session it returns a session type which has an ID. So we're going to do that. We're going to get the session ID from session and then use that to create a cookie. And lastly, we're going to use Next.js headers to basically set the cookie. Now, session cookie is going to have a name, a value, and also whatever attributes as well. So we're going to say attributes right here. So we are setting the cookie right here. And if everything works as expected, we want to also redirect the user, and redirect comes from navigation to login. Now let's see what happens. So if we go back here, hit sign up, we are redirected to login. That means everything works as expected. So now if we go to browser developer tools, go to application, and then after that, let's head over to cookies. We see a session cookie here, but again, not good enough for us because we don't know what was there before. So let's just create another one. So let's just use my dog's name, Kobe. Hit sign up, login. You can see an auth session cookie did get created, which wasn't there before. So that's exactly how you would sign up a user. Now, I recognize that we don't have any logic here to check for an existing user first before signing up a user, but we don't need to worry about that for now. Let's just make sure that whoever is they are signing up for the first time. And you can add that logic if you want to extend the specific auth layer to basically check if the user exists or not, but we don't need to do that right now. All right, so now it's time for us to build the login page. So just like we built sign up, just like we had create an account, we also need a login page as well. Login and sign up are very similar, as you can see right here. The only difference is title. So we can pretty much copy the sign up page we have, create a new route called as login, and we are going to create a new page.tsx and paste what we copied. Instead of creating an account, let's call login with a log sign. And instead of sign up action, we're gonna now have login action. Let's just create an empty file here called as login action.ts. Again, it's gonna be a server action as well. But now we don't need to literally worry about it. We can keep it as is. There's nothing in there. So let's create a simple function. And then let's call the login action and import it right here. Okay, so now we have username, we have password, and instead of sign up, it should be sign in. Okay, so this is not our app. This is the app. We now have a login page, which is pretty awesome. We have the username and we have the password. If we add value here, value is now empty. So now we can add this, and ideally what should happen is the minute we give it the user that already exists in the database, it should be able to log us in. So that's what we are going to do now. So now in the login action, similar to what we did earlier, we're going to log form data just to make sure everything works as expected. Go back here, hit sign in, go here. You can see that we have the Kobe and password is just literally password, super secure. So now let's go ahead and build our login server action here. So again, like we are doing for everything else, what we essentially need to do is very similar to the sign up action. We need to get username, we need to get a password. We don't need to hash it though, because that's already been done for us. We're gonna say that, hey, if type is string, we're gonna give it the same error messages, for example, as well. But then we're gonna check for existence. Does this user exist? If it exists and in the database is what we're gonna check. Then if the user does exist, then we need to verify password, because just because the user name exists does not mean that the password matches, because I could pretend to be someone else and that could lead to malicious attacks, which is not what we want. And we're going to use verify password using Argon as well, because again, we want to make sure everything works. And then we're going to create a session if everything works. And we're going to pretty much repeat what we did here. We're going to create the Lucia session. Then we're going to set the cookie in the browser. And then we're going to redirect to home in this case. So first, let's check if the user exists in the database or not. And for that, we're going to use the user collection like we did earlier. So first, we're going to check if the user exists or not. And for that, we're going to check if the user is an existing user. And we're going to use the user collection find function. And we're going to pass in the username here. Because if the user does not exist, then we just want to say, hey, there's an error, incorrect username or password. We don't want to give malicious users what is wrong with their specific entry. We just want to be very vague about it, incorrect username or password. But let's say the user does exist. And in that case, we want to check if it's a valid password or not. For that, we're going to use the verify function from Argon. We're going to give it the existing user.hash password that we have. We're going to give it the password and compare it. So we want to make sure that the existing user, whatever is in the database, and the password that the user entered matches. And we need to give it the same algorithm that we did earlier. So we're going to give it exactly this value. So now, if it's not valid, then we can again give it the same error saying that, hey, the password is not valid. Because again, don't give any information to the users. But if it's valid, then we want to do exactly what we did here. We're going to create the Lucia session and we're going to do all of this that we did earlier. So we can create here. Let's import Lucia here. User ID is going to be existing user dot underscore ID, because we already have the existing user. We're going to get the session ID from Lucia. Then cookies is going to be from next headers. Now that we have all of this information, we're going to again redirect the user, import it from next navigation, and redirect to home. This way we know that everything has worked as expected. So now let's test it out. So we have Kobe as a user. We know that Kobe is existent in the database, and we can make sure, double check as well right here. So we can click on users and we know that Kobe exists. So now let's sign up using Kobe. And if we hit sign in, there you go. We have been successfully logged into our account as expected. So in terms of login actions, we don't necessarily need any of this. Same thing in a sign up action. So In terms of our login action, all we needed to do was verify it using the same hash algorithm that we provided, create a Lucia session, create a session cookie, and then set the cookie. Now, if everything works as intended, then if we go to our cookies inside the browser developer tools, we also see a auth session, which is pretty awesome. Now on the home page, we literally have this. We don't even need it. We can pretty much get rid of all of it. Because here what we need to do is we need to verify if the specific user is valid or not. If that's the case, then we need to just redirect the user somewhere else. So for example, we need to check if there's a user that exists. We need to create a new function called as validate request. If there is no user, then we need to just redirect the user to /login because the user is already logged in. So let's turn this into async function. But before we do that, we need to style it. So now again, let's use the same styling here. And then let's create a div. And then this is where we would have our user. So here we can say text 3XL capitalize. So here it's time for us to access it. So we can say if user.user.username, then it exists. Otherwise, we need to say you need to log in. Frankly, we won't even reach to this condition because of this, but let's comment this out for now. So now let's go ahead and implement this validate request function. So that function could exist in our auth library. Here we can create a new function and call this validate request. Now in validate request, we want to check again, get the cookie from our browser developer tools in the cookie section, validate that specific session. Is this a valid user? If so, then set the cookie, refresh the cookie essentially, right? So what we're going to do here is say validate request equals cache. We're going to cache it in the React function. Then we're going to say this is going to be a async. It's going to return a promise. And it's either going to return a user or it's going to return a session or it's going to return user as null because if there's no valid user, or it's going to return session as null, for example. Now let's write some code here. So first, let's get the session ID. We're going to get the session ID from cookies.get Lucia.get, not user session, but session name, session cookie name, and get the value. Otherwise, it's going to be null. If there is no session ID, then just return what we talked about here. User is null, session is null. But let's say that if it does exist, then we are going to have a result and we can validate it using Lucia. So we can say validate session with session ID, and this Lucia is going to validate the session. And here it's going to be, there you go. Now, once Lucia validates the session, let's put this in a try catch block in case of any errors here. So here, this is what we can do. If there is a session and if the session is fresh, then what we want to do is create the cookie here. But if that's not the case, then we can just create a blank session cookie. So we can just say Lucia.create blank session cookie, and then cookies. Basically, we are going to nullify if anything that exists. .name. We already have this here, so we're going to just copy this. Perfect. And then we want to make sure that we are returning the result here. Now, we want to create the cookie here. So again, what we could do is similar to what we had earlier. We're going to create this, get the session cookie. So instead of session cookie, create session cookie, it's going to be result.session.id. And we are going to set the same thing again because this time we actually have it. So this is going to help validate it if the request is valid or not. So we can uncomment all of this. And we're going to say, let's validate it. Let's get rid of this as well. All right. So now if we go back and if we go back to home, see how we are getting navigated back to home. So let's delete this. Let's just log in with Kobe because we know that exists. And the logic is incorrect here. So if there is no user, return to login. So now let's just log in with Kobe, sign in, and look at that. We get username Kobe here. Now all we need is hello Kobe, because that's literally what we have here. So, and that's exactly the application that we are building here too. We have the auth explained header with sign up and login values. Alrighty, so now in order for us to make the navigation easier, let's just grab and paste this in the layout. All we're doing here is we are setting the header to be auth explained. We are creating a sign up and sign in link. And now let's also make this route to home as well. As we do that, if we go back to our application, you can see auth explained has hello Kobe here. If I go to login or sign up, I'm able to do that. But yeah, in reality, what we want is once the user is logged in or sign up, then if the user is already logged in, we don't need login or logout. We don't need login at all. All we are gonna need is logout. So that's also something that we can implement next. There's one more functionality we need to work out, which is that if the user is logged in, which it is in this case because we are seeing hello Kobe, then this login should turn into a logout. That means if I go back here in the layout, we have sign up and sign in. Or if we go here on the home page right here, then we should be able to log out here as well, for example. Or if we go to layout, then we should be able to log out here as well, because right now it says login. So we need a similar logic of homepage here, which is the validate logic. So if we go to layout and paste this, let's make this an async function, and then validate request and redirect the user, for example. This way, any user will be redirected. Now, similar to what we had here, that hey, if the user does exist. So what we can do here is we can keep sign up as is, but if the user exists, then use this as an li. Else, let's create a simple form with a action, some sort of an action, and then a button which says logout right there. So now here we can have a logout server action. But for now, let's just comment this out. So we should see logout here if we have everything works as expected. So if user.user exists, then it should be the opposite. And the form should go here. Perfect. So now you can already see that the logout does exist, which is what we want. Now let's give it a class name of button primary, and hover is gonna be BG purple 600. This could be a nice logout button here, for example. Same thing for the link as alrighty. So now the design we can fix that design a bit later. But we have the login and then we have the logout here. Now let's create the action for it. So we can say action equals logout action. So let's create a new action here called as logout action.ts. Gonna be a server action. It will have a very similar signature right here. Let's call this logout action. You go to layout, let's just say logout action. Perfect. Now we have the logout action here. we're gonna use exactly what we had here, which is that we're gonna need the validate request function, which is gonna validate if the user is valid or not. We can retrieve the session from it. And if we're gonna say if there is no session, then just return redirects to be at login. We don't want to deal with it. But then if the user is logging out, for example, we are gonna use the we're gonna import Lucia. We're gonna invalidate the session of the user with that specific ID as well. This way we want to clear everything that we have set up so far. We don't need anything here. Similarly, for session cookie, let's just create a blank session cookie so we can clear it all out. Similarly, we just need to grab all of this, what we had here. We're gonna clear everything out. There you go. So that's exactly what we need. So now if we go to our developer tools and go to cookies, we have all of this. The minute I click on logout, you can see that the auth session is gone and we have been redirected to log in, which is exactly what we're looking for. Now, I know that we added this in the layout itself, but we can pretty much move this elsewhere. So this way, sign up and sign in can stay as is. So we can just copy this entire thing and let's just move this back to login or sign in. There you go. And then here we can just do this logout action. And this can be outside the p tag, also the div. So we have the sign up and sign in if you want. But at the same time, when we go back to home, it says, hello, you need to log in. And we have the login option here. We don't need an unnecessary li here. So if I go back to home, it says, hello, you need to log in. But there's also an option to just hit login and just log in as well. So yeah, that's exactly how simple Lucia login is. And we have implemented so much in Lucia from scratch. But because of those helper functions, it made our life so much simpler with this library. So which one is exactly your favorite in terms of all the auth libraries out there? Do you think you're gonna go with Clerk, or do you think you're gonna try something like Lucia, which is really awesome? So let me know in the comments below what you're looking for next, and also what do you think about these libraries, and is this something you would give it a shot in your next project while implementing authentication? So that's all for this video. Bye for now.